Okay, welcome back everybody. We're now going to start our technical talks, and our first technical talk will be from Daniel Kristanto from University of Oldenburg, Germany. So please, Daniel.
Yep. Okay. So thank you very much for having me here, and thank you very much also for the really awesome invited talk. I learned a lot. Yeah. So I'm part of a meta project. So it's kind of a big project in Germany to address a replication crisis in sociology, psychology, economic, and different fields. So my talk here is about approximating the multiverse of latent variable predictions by graph theory measures of the human connectome, an extended active learning approach. So I will start with a term of guarding of working parts. So as a researchers, we often have this experience where we want to do research or we want to test a hypothesis. We have a starting point and we have a finish point. For example, the starting point is the raw data, and then the finish point is that we want to find the association, some kind of measure that we get from the raw data with other variables of interest. But then to go from the start to finish here, we have different working parts, which every methodological decision is creating a unique working part, or we can also call a multiverse, which is potentially impactful, where different working parts may have different results. And a group of working parts, or universes, creates a multiverse of potential analysis, bringing from the raw data to the outcome of a statistical association. Okay, so now I come to the more specific field. So we are here interested in fMRI-based graph measures and its association with behavioral outcomes. So what is the working parts here? So again, we start from the start and end, but what is the starting point and what is the finish point here in this field? So here the starting point is actually the raw fMRI data, and then the finish point is a graph network where there are nodes and links. The nodes are plain areas and the links are actually the connection between two plain areas. But what is between the starting point and the finish point here? So there are a lot of things to be done because my data is quite noisy because of physiological noise, because of noise from motion from the machine. So we need to do some kind of pre-processing steps, for example, motion correction, size timing correction, and so on, until finally we will get a graph or a plane network or graph that we can compute the graph measures from the plane network. Okay, so now, because we know that it's quite complicated to go from the starting point, the raw data of MRI, into the graph network of the brain, so we have to define what is the working part actually. So it's actually a part, it is not a part of study that I presented here, but this is another study that we conducted. So we did a systematic literature review on 252 papers related to fMRI, and we want to identify the working parts of fMRI preprocessing pipelines. So what we try to identify, what we try to extract from this number of papers, actually how they preprocess their fMRI data. So what we have, so the working part is quite complicated actually. To preprocess fMRI data, we have 61 different steps that different studies use it differently. So here is the aggregated working parts where the circle or the nodes are actually the steps. There are 61. The bigger the steps, the more studies use these steps. And the connection between nodes is actually the connection between working parts. So for example, here, the first step is actually to decide what software or toolbox we use to preprocess fMRI data. And even after we decide what kind of software, we have to think, so what is the next step? So some studies goes here, some study goes here, some studies goes here. So yeah, the working part is actually quite complicated here. Okay, and because the working parts here is quite complicated and we know that different working parts may lead to different results, then we have to think how to handle these working parts if we want to do some research in fMRI, especially we want to test some kind of hypothesis using fMRI graph measures or fMRI measures and its association with behavioral outcomes. So we come into a term of multiverse analysis. So multiverse analysis first coined by this paper published in 2016 where they perform a redoing analysis of other previous papers that found there is an association between fertility and religiosity and political perspective. So this paper tried to perform the redo analysis on that paper, but using more working parts. So it means they try different working parts to preprocess data. For example, they try different technique to handle outlier. They try different model, and what they found here is actually the distribution of p-values across different working parts. We see here that actually there are many working parts that found the results are not significant. So there is no association between fertility and religiosity, but only few of the working parts found the association to be significant. So it shows that actually using multiverse analysis, we can test the robustness of the finding. So given this importance of multiverse analysis, then we ask the next question: what is the contra of multiverse analysis? Of course, it is computationally expensive because we have to run the analysis in all possible working parts. In some cases, it can be 100,000, even million working parts. And then the next question is how to handle it, because it's really computationally expensive. There is another paper coming in 2022. Yeah. So this paper is introduce use of active learning approach to navigate to multiverse analysis. So this paper actually focus on, again, fMRI data, graph measures based on fMRI data to predict age. But actually, to define the graph measures from fMRI data, this paper used around 500 different working parts. And they investigate how actually different working parts give different prediction accuracy of age. So the active learning procedure is quite simple, but they calculate the graph measures from all the working parts. So they call it pipeline here because it's related to fMRI preprocessing. So they calculate the graph measures from all 540 working parts, and then they split the data set into three in terms of participants. So the first data set they use to create a low dimensional space. So what is this low dimensional space? So this is important for the active learning because it tells the similarity across working parts. So the dot here is actually the working parts. There are 544 dots or 544 working parts here. And the dots, they are close together. It means the working parts are similar. So for example, this one here, so this dot or the working parts here are more similar than the working parts here. And then once they have the low dimensional space from the split one, they perform active learning in split two. So what is active learning actually? So here in active learning, it samples only a small portion of the working parts, let's say 50, and then they run the 50 working parts to get the prediction accuracy of the graph measures to predict age from these 50 working parts. So only running in these 50 working parts. But then the rest of the working parts, around 400 something, they use active learning to infer the prediction of accuracy. And then after performing the active learning, they use the split tree to validate the result of the active learning. So this approach is actually quite useful for multiverse analysis because we don't need to run all the working parts. We just need to sample in a small portion of them and then just infer the rest of the working parts. But actually, there are still room for advancement in this proposal of active learning approach in multiverse analysis. So the first one, it is really is a bit technical. So the output of each pipeline of working part must be a vector. So here, because they use a graph measures as the output of each working part to predict age, they use the graph measures which is region specific. So it's a vector. When you have a 410 regions, so the graph measure, for example, like degree or centrality, for each brain region, it has one value. So for the whole brain, you will have a vector. But actually, there are also other graph measures that actually for the whole brain, you get only one value. For example, like global efficiency, modularity, small boldness. So they have also only one value. But using this method, it will not be possible to use these graph measures which has only one value. And then number 2 is that the predicted variable here is an age, which is only a single value and observable value. But actually in the field of cognitive psychology and also in psychiatry, the predicted variable, they are more interested into a latent variable, which is represented by a number of observable variable. And then number 3, there is only a static visualization of the multiverse of analysis results. So going from this finding, we propose an extension of the active learning approach in the case of predicting a latent variable reflecting attitudes towards alcohol by using fMRI-based graph measures. So how to do it? First, we define a working parts because we want to see the active learning in different working parts. So here only a very small working parts because we only have 4 different steps, and for each step we have a number of options here. So in total we have 144 working parts. So it's quite small for multiverse analysis. And for the data, we use the data from adolescent brain cognitive development, or ABCD, is quite a large data set, longitudinal data set in adolescents. So they have brain imaging data, they have behavioral data, they have questionnaire, yeah, they have many data related to the development of adolescents. So we use in total of 838 adolescents. And then the first extension that we did is we developed the search space for the active learning that handles both brain-wide and region-specific graph measures. So the output of the working part now is not only a vector, but we also consider that the output of the working part is also a single value. So for example, this is one working part. We calculate, we did the steps from the functional connectivity until we get the graph measures. We have a region specific, so this one is a vector because each brain region you have different value, and you have a brain wide. So for the whole brain you have only one value. So this one a vector, this one a single value. And then the next one, we calculate the similarity of the working parts across different brain regions. And then we average them to get only one matrix of the similarity between working parts. So this is 144 times 144 matrix, actually telling us the similarity between working parts. And then this metric will enter dimensionality reduction. So after 144 times 144 here, we will reduce the dimension into 144 times 2. So now for each working part, we have only 2 values. So we can visualize them into two-dimensional space, which I will tell you later. And then next, another extension is to integrate structural equation modeling. So this one is for predicting the latent variable. So the latent variable we use here is latent variable associated with attitude towards alcohol, which we predict using graph measures from different brain regions. And this one is a representation of a number of observable variables. So this one is actually answer to a questionnaire. So in the questionnaire, actually, there is a statement like, for example, alcohol is helping people to feel more relaxed, and then the participant need to rate whether they strongly agree, or strongly disagree. So from this questionnaire, we can get the latent variable, which is further predicted by using graph measures. Okay, so the first result is about the space and then exhaustive search. So I mentioned before that the similarity we transfer into a two-dimensional space that tells the similarity across different working parts. So we have the space here, 2 dimension, and here is the dot, actually the different working parts. And we can see here the similar working parts. For example, this one is a measure of modularity, they are close to each other, and this one is a measure of participation coefficient, they close to each other. And then next, we also perform an exhaustive search for each working part. So here we predict the latent variable to get the predicted variance of the latent variable for all the working parts. So the dot here is correspond to one working part, which is correspond to here. And we can see that actually across different working parts, we can see that we have different predicted variance. So it means that if we take different decisions, it may lead to different results. And how about the active learning? So we take this one, the previous result, as a ground truth for the active learning, because in the active learning we only capture or sample a small portion of the working parts and infer the rest of the working parts. And it works like this one. First, we sample only 5 or 5 working parts, and it will show the space of the predicted variance, and then we increase the number of sample, 10, 20, 30, and also refining the predicted variance using active learning. And this one now using active learning is comparable with the exhaustive search. For example, this area here is better than this area here. So after 30 iterations, so it means after sampling only 30 working parts, the active learning is able to mimic the predicted variance from the exhaustive search, which is our contour. And then we also run the active learning 20 times with different initial random point, and we see that actually the Spearman correlation between the active learning and the exhaustive search is quite high, although we have different initial random points to sample. So here we can see that actually the active learning works quite well to mimic the result from the exhaustive search or the ground truth. And the results, the next results about interactive visualization. So I need to change here to a browser. So here is actually an interactive visualization of the result of the multiverse analysis. Yeah, it's something to reload. Okay, so it's quite heavy. So here the dot here is actually the working parts. So we can see that actually similar working parts with similar color, they close to each other, and then if you click, it's actually quite interactive. You can drag and drop, and if you click on a specific node or working part, it can tell you what is the name of the working part and also how much the predicted accuracy or the predicted variance of each working part. It's quite heavy. And we can also select which working part that we want to see. For example, this one, and then we see like which other working parts are related to the selected working parts. And we can also control on how much similarity across different working parts. And then next, and for the final remarks here, we extended the previously proposed active learning-based approach to aid the implementation of multiverse analysis by first developing a search space which can handle both vector and singular value output from each working part. And we also integrate structural equation modeling to allow the prediction of latent variable, which is quite common in cognitive psychology and also psychiatry. And we also visualize the multiverse analysis results in an interactive way. And then, yeah, talking about the multiverse analysis, we can see that actually multiverse analysis can help us to test the robustness of our finding using different working parts or different ways, different decisions that we can take, and also it can explore the unexplored. But on the other hand, it is actually a dangerous place because some of the working parts may be arbitrary, and we can get easily lost in the multiverse analysis. So I would say this is still in a premature stage, so there are research needed in multiverse analysis on how to decide which working parts are defensible and how to jointly report the results across different working parts. So I think that's all. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you, Daniel. We have questions from our computationally literate attendees.
Okay, so let's start with a more sort of philosophical question. So I think you're kind of obliquely addressing this at the very end here, something like which working paths are defensible. But basically, how can you say that I can really see the appeal of this kind of analysis because having designed some data analysis pipelines, you do find yourself faced with a lot of sort of detailed decisions where all the choices seem a bit arbitrary, but in the end, you can't really say that every possible choice is equally valid. So philosophically, how would you decide like what range of choices to include
Mhm.
in your multiverse? Like, for instance, for your sparsity of the
Mhm.
structural connectome, you picked like 4 particular values, but I mean, if you're treated as a percentage, you could say it's a continuum, though really because you're
Sure.
including or excluding discrete edges, it's got a finite
Mhm.
number of values, but you're picking 4 out of those finite values. So why those 4? Like, there's just an inherent sort of question of, is there a philosophy to it? Is it arbitrary? And if it's
Yep.
arbitrary, how is it?
Yeah. That's a good question actually in multiverse analysis. Here, first I would like to emphasize that multiverse analysis actually is just a tool. It is not really a whole study. So if we have a research question and we want to address them, it's nice that we have some kind of multiverse analysis, but this is not the whole study. It's just tool that to show that our finding is robust by only choosing the forking parts that is defensible based on our knowledge or based on literature, and how to define whether the forking parts are defensible or not. There is a study actually that I did not put here. So this study is published in 2021. I forgot the name of the author, but the title is something like a traveler's guide for multiverse analysis. So they have some kind of framework concept. It's still a conceptual framework. It's not a computational framework. So they have a computational framework that we have to assess the equivalence of the forking of the forking parts of the forking parts or of the decisions that we have. For example, we have for example the graph measures here. We have a measure of global efficiency and modularity. For example, these two, we can see whether these two options, global efficiency or modularity, they are equivalent or not in terms of our research question. For example, we ask whether the brain segregation is related to some kind of behavioral measures. So it means we only have to keep the measures of segregation, which is modularity, but not the global efficiency. So in this case, the global efficiency and modularity, they are not equivalent. So we have to take only the modularity there. So this kind of framework actually has been proposed to reduce the number of to find to identify the defensible blocking parts. But yeah, there is no clear guideline or clear computational framework to address this problem.
So if I may offer some
Mhm.
guidance with an orienting question. I would recommend that you review carefully the presentations in our first invited talk by Julian Hector and Nan Laird. You're in effect attempting an analysis that's analogous to a genome-wide association study. However, in reality, it is frankly far more complicated and far more challenging and difficult for any number of reasons, which I could give a whole talk on as a psychiatrist and human behavior, not to mention how psychometrics are and should be done, not to mention how even any of your measures at the regional level or brain-wide level are being evaluated before you even attempt to do any kind of learning algorithm applied to the data in order to elaborate any kind of clusters or associations. So I would encourage you to go back to basics, understand the basic issues and concerns that were presented in the genome-wide association studies, and then draw the analogous corollaries for your work in functional brain imaging. And it will serve as a very challenging example that warrants lots of further study to address questions of reproducibility on many levels, reliability on many levels, frankly, scientific integrity on many levels. So I would be very careful and cautious about any inferences you might draw from the work before establishing much better understanding of all the methods and tools that you're attempting to apply to very, very difficult questions involving human psychology and behavior. Does that make sense? Do you understand the concerns here? In other words, we have the same fundamental underlying concern about correlation causation fallacy as we do in genome-wide association studies. But frankly, it's even more complicated and challenging than that, because at least in the genome-wide association studies, the data is reasonably reliable about the values of the SNPs and the underlying data. We don't even have that level of confidence for the data that you have about whatever measure you're evaluating in fMRI at a pixel, at a voxel, at a region, or brain line. So the whole level of indirection is many more times indirect, therefore falling into the pit of the correlation causation fallacy is far more far more likely. And thus you're working on a problem that is far more challenging. So one has to be much more careful about any inferences or claims you might wish to make. So that's a cautionary explanation. And I hope I've pointed you in the right direction. Try to do the analogy with the pitfalls and fallacies that were discussed in the genome-wide association studies talk, okay? And that will help guide you to a more reproducible, reliable path forward that can produce better, more trustworthy results from which we can assume some level of scientific integrity. Ultimately, you will also have to address the question of relating it to underlying biology, which is another very difficult, challenging question. But this problem of connectomics, to use the phrase or word connectomics, with functional MR imaging is an extraordinarily challenging problem. And so investigators in this field must tread with caution.
Yeah, I agree on that one.
All right, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Thank you for presenting a wonderful example that helps address all these issues of reproducibility, reliability, and scientific integrity. All right, I'm gonna close the recording.
Before you go on, I just want to thank you also, because I am not one of the people who might be thought of as computationally literate at this point, but I really appreciated your presentation and choosing this to speak about.
Yes, thank you so much, Daniel, for joining us and presenting today. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for
Let's take a 1-minute break so I can do separate recordings.